For generations, it remained locked, a place whispered about in palace corridors, known only to a bloodline's inner circle, the royal family vault. But when Prince William breaks the silence with a revelation so stunning it brings Harry to his knees, the world realizes this isn't just about burial, it's about betrayal, legacy, and a father's unspoken promise. What was once hidden is now threatening to tear apart what remains of the monarchy's fragile brotherhood. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For centuries, the royal family vault beneath St. George's Chapel has existed as more than stone and sanctity. It is a final resting place, yes, but also a seal of legacy. Only a chosen few knew its full significance. Not just where royalty is laid to rest, but who among them is immortalized as a true pillar of dynasty. Assigning a vault spot is no routine decision, it is spiritual permanence. Generation after generation, the royals quietly determined their future even in death, each spot carefully chosen long before a passing breath. And yet, never before had the public heard of such an assignment being openly declared. That changed when Prince William, stoic and controlled, made a quiet but chilling announcement during a royal briefing. Prince George's vault spot had already been secured. And not just any vault spot. The prime space reserved for monarchs, previously assumed to be waiting for a future heir, had now been irrevocably assigned to George. There was no mention of Harry, no consideration, not even a gesture of inclusion. What this meant was unmistakable and unspoken but brutal removal. For Prince Harry, this was not about resting places. It was about finality, erasure, and a wound deeper than any public fallout. To be cut out of history even in death was something no royal had experienced so viscerally in modern memory. This wasn't exile. This was obliteration, a quiet, ceremonial act that shouted louder than scandal ever could. The vault, once a mystery, had suddenly become a mirror, reflecting the emotional fracture at the monarchy's core. And while William's words were careful, perhaps even sympathetic in tone, their implication was as sharp as the crown's edges. There was no space for Harry, not even beneath the same stone. And as the public tried to understand this choice, the palace remained still. No clarifications, no damage control. Only a cold, elegant silence. And in that silence, the symbolism screamed louder than any tabloid. The vault was no longer about tradition, it had become a battlefield. But this cold announcement wasn't a spontaneous act. It was the final move in a plan, long in motion, one that had been sealed behind golden doors years ago. It arrived under strict protocol, a sealed letter from the late Queen, opened only in the presence of King Charles and Prince William. What it contained wasn't just a ceremonial order, it was a directive that would divide sons and define legacies. Inside, a shocking instruction that would leave one royal bloodline honored, and another shattered forever. The letter was stored under lock, guarded not just by royal protocol, but by an unspoken understanding that its contents were not to be read until after the Queen's passing. When the day finally came, a quiet but heavy meeting was arranged in one of the most restricted chambers in Windsor, where King Charles and Prince William, alongside a royal legal advisor assigned to oversee such confidential transitions. The envelope was unmarked, but unmistakably significant. As the seal broke and the paper unfolded, the Queen's unmistakable handwriting stared back at them. Within seconds, William's eyes froze. His pulse slowed. For a brief moment, even Charles sat in stunned silence. It wasn't a general message of love or family unity, it was a surgical directive, written with precision and unmistakable intent. She had made a decision about the royal vault, and there was no ambiguity. The letter outlined specific instructions. The vault space traditionally reserved for future sovereigns was to be locked in for Prince George. No substitutions, no delays, no discussions. The Queen's reasoning, though subtly worded, suggested the importance of continuity, of reminding the nation that stability lies in the bloodline of succession, not in deviation. It was a tingly clinical approach to legacy. And within those lines, something else screamed with its absence. There was no mention of Prince Harry. Not a word. No place for him. No gesture toward his children. Nothing to acknowledge that he too carried royal blood. The silence spoke louder than any declaration. Charles felt the sting of his mother's final hand. As a father, he knew the weight of what this would do to Harry. But as a monarch, he was bound. His expression reportedly turned hollow as he reread the letter again and again, as though searching for a loophole, a lifeline. But the Queen had been deliberate, and Charles, ever torn between his personal agony and his inherited role, chose to obey. William, meanwhile, was composed but deeply conflicted. He had always known that responsibilities came with sacrifices, but he hadn't expected this. To receive the torch in such a merciless manner left him rattled. Yet, he said nothing that day, only nodded and placed the letter back inside the folder, now bearing the weight of a decision that would echo far beyond the chamber walls. For Harry, that silence became a scream that would soon explode into headlines, heartbreak, and irrevocable damage. Because what had once been quietly passed between father and son was about to become a public statement, an irreversible truth wrapped in polished words and ruthless finality. But if the Queen's words delivered the blow, it was William's deliberate voice that made it public, and Harry's world began to collapse. In a moment meant to offer peace, William did the unthinkable. He chose transparency but not mercy. As he stood before a quiet press circle and confirmed that George's vault had been secured with tradition and legacy in mind, every syllable hit like thunder. And in private, when Harry called him pleading, broken, what William said chilled even the closest aides. For William, it wasn't supposed to unfold this way. The letter had already fractured something inside him, but silence, he believed, would only deepen the wound. His advisors urged caution. Some warned that breaking the centuries-old discretion surrounding the vault was not only unorthodox, it was dangerous. The monarchy thrived on mystique, on veiling the unspoken rituals that bound its mysticism. But William was adamant. The public deserved clarity, the family deserved finality, and most importantly, George deserved certainty. There would be no confusion, no ambiguity about the line of succession, not even in death. So William stepped in front of the press, measured and unshaken, and confirmed what had only been whispered behind marble doors. The Queen's chosen vault spot had been assigned to Prince George. He framed it as an act of legacy, of loyalty to the late monarch's vision. But to those watching with keener eyes, it looked like something else entirely, a rejection sealed with royal polish. And to Harry, it felt like a dagger. As news outlets ran headlines within minutes, Harry, then thousands of miles away, watched in a stunned silence that quickly gave way to fury. He didn't wait for a briefing. He called his brother directly, no intermediaries, no aides. What began as a desperate attempt to understand spiraled into a confrontation laced with years of unresolved pain. "Why wasn't I told?" Harry reportedly demanded, his voice cracking with both rage and sorrow. William, calm but unrelenting, gave him the truth that stung the hardest. "Because it was never going to be you, Harry. Not as an heir, not as a future sovereign. And now, not even as a figure worthy of resting in the sacred heart of royal burial." Those within earshot of the call later described the silence that followed William's words as unbearable. It wasn't just cold, it was final. A line had been drawn. For all the palace diplomacy and family traditions, nothing could disguise the brutal emotional reality that had just taken root. And still, William didn't waver. He carried the weight of duty, not just to his son, but to an institution that demanded clarity above comfort. In his eyes, Harry had made choices that took him away. The vault, in William's mind, was simply following the same path, but while William's resolve hardened, Harry's unraveling deepened. The brother who had once stood beside him at their mother's funeral had now become the face of a future in which Harry held no place, not even in legacy. And yet, as royal doors shut tighter than ever, Harry found himself drawn toward one last hope, King Charles. But what he uncovered was even more devastating. In the darkest corridors of Windsor, Harry expected fatherly comfort. Instead, he found silence so thunderous it echoed like betrayal. When he confronted King Charles, the monarch didn't raise his voice, he simply walked away. The vault had become a symbol of everything Harry had lost, not just a burial site, but a seat in the royal soul. When Harry arrived unannounced at Clarence's house, there was no formality, no press coverage, just a quiet desperation to find answers only a father could give. But as he stood before the man who once lifted him onto royal balconies and whispered bedtime stories no one else could hear, Harry was met not with affection but restraint. King Charles, regal yet distant, listened briefly, then turned away without a word. No explanation, no eye contact. The monarch's silence wasn't empty, it was deliberate. It was the kind of silence that told Harry the decision had already been made, and nothing he could say would unmake it. For a son already grappling with exile from public duty, this felt like being buried alive in Legacy's grave. As Charles withdrew, rumors swirled that his silence wasn't born of cruelty but conflict. Insiders whispered of a moment just days prior when Charles had nearly overturned the Queen's directive, that he had paused, alone, hand trembling over the order, debating whether to add Harry's name beside George's. But then, according to erst close to Camilla, the Queen consort had urged him to leave it be. "It's too late now," she allegedly said. "Let it stand." That phrase, "let it stand," became the chilling echo in Harry's mind as he replayed the encounter again and again. Had his fate been sealed by tradition, or by the whispered counsel of a woman he had never fully accepted as stepmother or sovereign-in-waiting? And yet, amidst the coldness, Harry's memory fought back with warmth. He recalled childhood afternoons with Charles in the garden, the way his father once spoke of legacy as something that should be earned, not inherited. Those moments now felt like fiction-forgotten chapters erased by royal ink. What had once been a story of family had transformed into one of calculated lineage, bloodlines curated not by love, but by optics. In the eyes of the monarchy, it seemed Harry was no longer essential, not in life, not in death. The emotional toll was unrelenting. First his brother's blunt declaration, now his father's haunting silence. And in that silence, Harry realized he was no longer just estranged from the institution, he was exiled from its future, its memory, and now its grave. He wasn't just being denied a vault, he was being erased from the spiritual geography of the monarchy. But in his isolation, Harry wasn't just mourning a symbolic space, he began to dig deeper into the vault's true purpose. And what he uncovered turned this into something far more sinister. Beneath centuries of stone lies a Ruth, more buried than any royal coffin. In an archived clause buried within a 1936 succession document, Harry discovers something that shakes the very foundation of his exclusion, a lineage purity pact that names heirs to sacred vault spots. The clause had remained sealed until now, while wandering through fragments of royal history in a quiet attempt to make sense of his erasure. Harry stumbled across something that hadn't seen light in decades. It wasn't displayed in any grand archive or bound in velvet. This document was tucked deep within the restricted annex of a royal legal library, flagged only by a forgotten footnote and a discreet reference code. The year was 1936, the monarchy on the brink of collapse as Edward VIII abdicated in disgrace. But amid the crisis, a hidden agreement was drafted not about power, but about burial. It laid out a clause, cold and clinical, stating that vault positions were to be reserved for those whose lineage remains unbroken and spiritually untainted. The language was ambiguous, but the intent was unmistakable. Those in direct succession who preserved the crown's values, defined not in law but in custom, were to receive the resting places that mattered most. What chilled Harry wasn't just the existence of the clause, it was what came after. The clause had been dormant, dismissed over the decades as irrelevant and outdated. But according to internal notes scribbled decades later and archived under Queen Elizabeth II's reign, it had been quietly reinstated, not publicly, not ceremonially, privately folded back into tradition by a monarch who had grown increasingly concerned about modern optics and institutional continuity. The revival of that clause was never announced. It was never debated. And yet it carried the force of absolute royal decree. It was, in effect, the quiet execution of Harry's eligibility. When he read it, the realization slammed into him with devastating clarity. This wasn't about betrayal in the moment it had been preordained, the moment he walked away from royal duties, the moment he married Meghan and chose a path of independence. This ancient, buried clause had activated like a trapdoor beneath his feet. His decision to live freely had cost him something more than a title. It had cost him a place among his ancestors. He hadn't just lost his status in the present, he had been cut out of history's end. And that revelation broke him. Because it wasn't just his vault, it was Archie's. It was Lilibet's. The clause's phrasing made it painfully clear that the stain, once marked, stretched across generations. His children were no longer considered part of the burial line, not because of blood, but because of legacy. The collapse Harry felt in that moment was unlike any grief he had ever known. He hadn't simply been pushed aside. He had been written out before he even knew he was holding the pen. As Harry unraveled the legacy clause, another hand moved silently in the background, one he never suspect. Ted, one whose influence changed everything. Whispers around Buckingham turned into storms behind closed doors. Sources claim Camilla played a pivotal role in enforcing the Queen's burial directives. With veiled words and unspoken influence, she allegedly ensured George was chosen and Harry erased. Was this the final act of a long-brewing power shift? For those closest to the crown, the shift in power wasn't sudden, it was quiet, gradual, and chillingly precise. In the Queen's final years, Camilla's presence had evolved from tolerated consort to trusted confidant. While the public still debated her legacy, behind palace walls, her word began to carry unprecedented weight. It was within that influence, according to insiders, that Camilla began to steer the Queen toward a more secure and selective vision for the monarchy's future, one that conveniently excluded Prince Harry. Though no written proof has surfaced tying her directly to the reinstatement of the lineage purity clause, several aides suggest Camilla didn't need ink to get her way. Her influence was indirect, persuasive, and always draped in the language of tradition. What began as private conversations about maintaining the line of succession soon evolved into deeper discussions about preserving legacy, especially in death. Reports emerged that Camilla quietly supported the view that the vault should be reserved strictly for those deemed publicly loyal to the institution. And while she never named Harry explicitly, this message was clear. A prince who walked away from his royal duties, wrote a blistering memoir, and dared to challenge palace machinery in global interviews, was not, in Camilla's world, a symbol of enduring legacy. He was a risk, an optics disaster, a disruption to an image she and her circle had fought to stabilize. Those tensions between Camilla and Harry weren't born in a vacuum. The cracks had been forming for years, some said ever since Charles remarried. Others point to Harry's bold defense of his mother's legacy and his thinly veiled criticisms of Camilla's rise to queen consort. But what made this fracture irreversible wasn't past resentment, it was strategy. Camilla's allies had long positioned Catherine and George as the monarchy's golden thread. Media briefings subtly elevated their importance while relegating Harry and Meghan to the periphery. The burial vault was simply the final proof a sacred tradition wielded to cement a narrative of loyalty, purity, and control. For Harry, the betrayal was layered, not just the sting of his father's silence or his brother's dismissal, but the realization that Camilla, once on the outside herself, had now helped close the gates on him entirely. He believed she saw him as a stain on the institution's carefully polished future. And as William stood by Camilla during this storm, defending her decisions as aligned with royal continuity, Harry felt the final fracture, not just in family, but in fate. The monarchy had chosen its image, and Harry had been cut from the frame. But even as power shifted and vaults were assigned, one voice rose from the silence, a voice that had stayed loyal to Harry until the very end. Buried deep in the Princess Diana Memorial Archives, a locked drawer held a sealed letter. It wasn't addressed to Charles, not to William. It was for Harry. In it, Diana shared her deepest fear, that Harry would be cast out of the family legacy. Her prophetic words, penned in pain, would reignite a royal firestorm. The letter was discovered not through ceremony or planning, but by chance. A trusted archivist, sorting through personal effects for an upcoming memorial exhibit, came upon a folder marked only with Diana's initials and a date that preceded her final overseas trip. Inside, under layers of private notes and photographs, lay the sealed envelope. It bore no royal seal, only the simple inscription, to be opened by Harry. When it was handed to him, no one could have anticipated what it would contain. The words inside weren't grand or political. They were raw. Diana wrote of a mother's instinct, a growing fear she couldn't name but felt deeply that her youngest son, though cherished, would one day be pushed to the edge of royal memory. She feared a time would come when the palace would draw lines not just through title or role but through something far colder: remembrance. In the letter, Diana spoke vaguely of a place, the sacred space, where they keep history close to bone, a phrase that struck Harry immediately. Though she never named the vault, it was clear what she meant. She warned that legacy would be measured by obedience, not heart, and that the ones who asked questions, the ones like him, would be slowly erased. Her fear wasn't about scandal, it was about erasure, a burial in name only, while true belonging would be locked behind duty and silence. For Harry, the letter shattered what little remained of his emotional composure. He wasn't imagining it. He wasn't overreacting. His mother had seen it coming. She had known. Trembling, heart-pounding, he brought the letter to William, not with malice, but with hope perhaps this would be the thing to make his brother understand. But what followed wasn't unity, it was hesitation. William read the letter slowly and silently before folding it and staring into the distance. He didn't deny it, he didn't question Diana's words, but he said nothing. And that nothing was louder than any rejection Harry had ever received. The brief flicker of regret in William's eyes vanished beneath the weight of duty. Mum didn't understand what the crown needed, he finally muttered, his voice strained, not cruel but removed. Detached. Loyal to the institution above all else. Word of the letter spread before the palace could contain it. Whether leaked intentionally or not, headlines erupted across continents. Diana warned Harry of royal erasure, one read. Public fury surged. Diana's words, once buried, were now igniting questions the monarchy could no longer dismiss. Citizens began asking whether tradition had turned into a weapon, whether the very thing Diana had feared was now unfolding before their eyes. And as Harry watched the world echo his pain, one truth became undeniable. The monarchy could no longer bury this. Not the vault, not the past, not her. With public pressure mounting and secrets unraveling, the monarchy was now forced to confront its oldest shadows and its most dangerous truths. Protests outside the gates, headlines exploding, and public outrage igniting across the Commonwealth, the vault decision became a symbol of royal cruelty. As William stood firm and Harry spoke emotionally to the world, the question turned deadly serious. If this family can't bury its sons with dignity, what does it stand for anymore? The release of Diana's letter had detonated a cultural bomb. What began as a family dispute hidden behind centuries of stone had now become a global reckoning. Vault blueprints and succession files leaked anonymously to the press showed that the burial assignments had not only been signed but finalized long before Harry had even left the country. The timelines were damning, the optics were worse. Images of Harry beside his mother's grave were juxtaposed with headlines like "The Forgotten Son" and "Buried Before Death." Online forums exploded with fury. Journalists demanded answers. Commentators asked the impossible question: how could a family so steeped in symbolism fail to uphold its own values in death? Crowds began to gather outside Windsor and Buckingham, holding signs not of political rebellion but of personal betrayal. And while a portion of the public stood by William, praising him for honouring Queen Elizabeth's vision, others saw only a cold system that punished independence. The divide grew deeper with every passing hour. Behind palace walls, royal advisors scrambled. Internal sources claimed the crisis team held emergency meetings at dawn and dusk, some urging William to reconsider the public narrative, even to release a new statement that softened the language around George's vault. But William refused. His position was unshakable. The Queen had made her intentions clear, and he would not betray them, not for optics, not for pressure, and certainly not for Harry. Meanwhile, King Charles remained silent. That silence, once seen as measured, was now interpreted as paralysis. Then came whispers his health was faltering. Some staff members hinted he'd been taken to Sandringham to rest. Others believed he was simply choosing to withdraw, unable to face the moral wreckage left in his mother's wake. But absence, in this case, only deepened the crisis. The monarchy had no voice, just echoes. Then came Harry's interview. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't fiery, it was heartbreak. Sitting before the camera with no royal attire, no formal setting, just grief, he said the words that no crown could silence. This was never about a coffin. It's about what it means to be remembered, what it means to be wanted. The world listened. Social media flooded with support. Major newspapers printed the quote across their front pages. Harry wasn't asking for a spot in the vault, he was asking for a place in the story. In response, William broke his silence not with empathy but with formality. A carefully worded, frostbitten statement was issued from Kensington Palace. The royal family's legacy is guided by duty, not sentiment. The vault designations reflect that principle. There will be no changes. The message was sharp, final, and with it came the weight of something far more dangerous than grief defiance. But as the palace braced for collapse, a new name entered the room, one who could either rebuild the royal bond or shatter it for good. With the nation's eyes on her, Catherine, Princess of Wales, stepped into the storm. Her decision wasn't written in tradition or sealed in protocol, it was personal. And when she proposed what no one expected, the monarchy gasped. One vault, two brothers, a new path if only they could both accept it. As tensions spiraled and the monarchy faced a pressure it hadn't known since Diana's death, Catherine emerged not as a symbol of silence, but as a voice of reason. While others maneuvered with cold strategy and ceremonial tradition, she took a step that risked both her image and influence. Behind closed doors, she arranged a private meeting, a final attempt to heal what decades of history had tried to tear apart. In a small chamber beneath Windsor, she called together the three most fractured figures of the crisis: King Charles, Prince William, and Prince Harry. What happened in that room has been pieced together only through whispers and reluctant leaks. But one truth rings clear: Catherine was done watching her family destroy itself for the sake of outdated codes. She proposed a solution neither side expected: a shared vault, one memorial, not for heirs, not for legacy, but for blood. A physical reminder that no matter what duty had done to owe them, they were still brothers. The proposal wasn't about reversing the Queen's wishes, it was about honoring what Diana had feared and hoped for in her final words. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, according to insiders, King Charles wept, not silently, not politely, but with the weight of a man who had seen too much time pass without peace. It was the first time, some said, that he had cried in front of his sons since their mother's funeral. But the silence that followed wasn't unity, it was confrontation. William, stone-faced, questioned whether such a move would dishonor their grandmother's wishes. Harry, eyes hollow but voice sharp, asked if honoring the Queen meant burying love alongside power. The air was thick with generational ghosts. The vault had become more than stone, it was now a symbol of reconciliation or ruin. Neither brother yielded at first. William saw tradition. Harry saw redemption. Catherine saw two sons still chained to grief. In the end, no vote was cast, no document signed. But the conversation shifted something. Later that evening, the palace issued a statement, brief, cryptic, and dripping with subtext. Decisions have been made. The legacy evolves. No one knew exactly what it meant. But one thing was clear: the monarchy had blinked. Perhaps not in surrender, but in recognition that some legacies require more than obedience, they require mercy. What remains buried may never rest, but for the brothers born of the same royal blood, perhaps it's not the vault that matters, but whether they find peace before it's too late. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.